Hey, Nick, what's up? How are... Oh. What the...
No, I got 12 kids. I need this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just had a baby. I'll take one. Can I have one? Yeah? No Diddy.
Been when I was a kid, like 16, 17, standing outside.
Nick.
Yeah,
This one. Come on.
Yeah, I live my truth.
I benefited from it. Nick Cannon used to sleep on my couch.
Wow.
13 years old. He'd be in one part of the house. He'd be like, "Can I, nigga, go back in there? You can't, the fuck back in there. You can't come in here." And he'd be like this, right? He slept on the couch. Ed Sheeran was the latest. Ed Sheeran slept. Wow. Ed Sheeran, my new house. Ed Sheeran slept on my studio floor for 6 weeks. I would show up to the party in my little town car. There's town, you know. I grabbed my town car so I could skirt. Puff the SUVs and the Bentleys, the whole night. He get out. I get out too with a camera. The big Canon, like, yo, Puff, I should document this. Yo, what's up, Playboy? What you talking about? I said, no, I should get this, man. You, Fonz, the whole nine. He says, yeah, let him through.
Look at it. He had all of the attractiveness that would lure, innocent women in, the money, the power, the fame, the fun. It looked charisma, like before this year, a Diddy party sounded like a good time. Right. I remember being 16, 17, standing out in the cold in New York trying to get into a Diddy party. Right. That every celebrity, or I've DJ'd parties at Diddy's house where every celebrity, they may not be talking about it right now, but every A-list celebrity in the world was there. And you're like, this is the holy grail. Wasn't no weird stuff going. Everybody's enjoying themselves and having a good time. But now the definition of a Diddy party is it sounds Diddy. It sounds dark. It sounds twisted. It sounds like things we can't even fathom.
About those pictures that showed up.
What?
Didn't you have some pictures of you playing naked basketball? Or
I know it wasn't that. We was on the beach or something. I don't know. It was young in my career. You know how we do.
Did you kill the pictures somehow? Did you buy them up?
I think we had to pay for them. They found them in my house in Vegas.
Right.
And Vegas years. Shit, I was about to start a whole
about the Jamie Foxx situation. I was literally like 7 years old. And a lot of you guys don't understand that I practically lived at radio stations with my mom. Like, I was there 24/7. I was always at the radio station. So I got to hear adults talking about things because I was a fly on the wall at that point. So 7-year-old Crystal heard about these celebrity butt naked basketball games. And I couldn't remember who he even was. I just remember thinking at that time, I was like, why do those men want to play basketball naked together? Like, that's so silly. Like, they're funny. And it didn't dawn on me until I was like an adult that I was like, oh.
Nick Cannon has joked for years about having more kids than he can count. But what if that punchline is tied to something far darker than anyone realized? As Diddy's name floods timelines once again, old interviews, forgotten anecdotes, and unsettling timelines are resurfacing, pulling Nick Cannon straight into the center of a conversation he's never fully addressed. From attending Diddy parties at just 16 years old to sleeping on Jamie Foxx's couch as a teenager, the connections start early, and they don't stop there. Because once you line up the parties, the living arrangements, the rumors, and even Nick's own admissions about trauma-driven decisions, the story shifts from celebrity gossip into something far more uncomfortable. And according to whispers circulating behind the scenes, even Mariah Carey may know more than she's ever said out loud. Diddy's name is back where it hasn't been in years, at the center of public scrutiny. And this time, people aren't just watching the headlines, they're rewinding the tape. Old interviews, forgotten jokes, and casual comments that once sounded harmless are suddenly being replayed with a very different tone. And as the internet starts pulling threads, one name keeps popping up in places no one expected: Nick Cannon. Not as a headline villain, not even as an accuser, but as someone who has been orbiting this world since he was barely old enough to understand it. That's why this matters now. Because when a powerful figure's past is re-examined, everyone who once laughed it off or bragged about proximity gets pulled back into the conversation, whether they want to be or not. Nick Cannon has always presented himself as the carefree insider, the guy who was there but somehow untouched. He's joked openly about attending his first Diddy party at just 16 years old, framed it as a badge of honor, even laughed it off like proof he made it early. For years, those comments were brushed aside as industry folklore, just another story about how young stars grew up too fast in Hollywood. But with Diddy trending again and old clips resurfacing, that same story doesn't land the same way. Instead, people are asking why a teenager was even in those rooms to begin with, and why Nick has always been so comfortable bringing it up without ever really explaining what being there meant. What makes Nick unavoidable in this moment is that his name doesn't appear once or twice. It keeps resurfacing across different timelines, different interviews, different people. He isn't someone fans associate with controversy in the traditional sense, which is exactly why his proximity stands out now. When someone who has built a brand on humor, openness, and self-awareness keeps showing up in stories tied to an increasingly dark narrative, it forces a second look. Especially when those stories aren't rumors pulled from nowhere, but Nick's own words, shared casually over the years, now stripped of context and replayed under a much harsher light. This renewed attention isn't about guilt by association. It's about re-examining access, influence, and the environments young entertainers were placed in long before anyone questioned them. As the public revisits Diddy's past, they're no longer satisfied with surface-level nostalgia or industry myths. They want to know who was there, how old they were, and what was normalized behind closed doors. And whether Nick Cannon likes it or not, his early proximity, his repeated admissions, and his refusal to ever fully unpack those experiences make him an unexpected but central figure in a story that's far from over. What makes this story hit harder is that the first breadcrumb doesn't come from leaked documents, anonymous sources, or internet conspiracy. It comes directly from Nick Cannon himself. Over the years, Nick has volunteered these details casually, almost playfully, dropping them into interviews and conversations like harmless flexes. He said more than once that he attended his first Diddy party when he was just 16 years old, delivering a line with a smile, like it was proof that he'd arrived early in the industry. At the time, people laughed it off, chalked it up to Hollywood being Hollywood. But now, with Diddy back under intense scrutiny, those same words land very differently. Because when Nick says it himself, there's no room to dismiss it as gossip. It's a first-hand admission. What's striking isn't just what Nick says, but how he says it. He doesn't sound hesitant or conflicted. He sounds proud. He's joked about it, brushed it off, even doubled down with comments about living his truth, as if simply owning the story is enough to close the door on further questions. But that confidence is exactly what makes people pause now. When someone openly acknowledges being present in adult celebrity spaces as a teenager and treats it like a rite of passage, it forces listeners to reconsider what was normalized back then and who benefited from that normalization. Nick's tone has always been light, almost deflective, as if humor could insulate the story from deeper examination. He rarely offers specifics, never lingers on details, and certainly never frames the experience as something worth unpacking. Instead, he presents it as a badge of honor, a sign that he was trusted, included, chosen. But in today's context, that framing raises more questions than it answers. Why was a 16-year-old being welcomed into those rooms? Who decided that was appropriate? And why, years later, does Nick still choose to brag rather than explain? That's where the intrigue really sets in. Because Nick isn't being exposed by someone else. He's exposing himself in fragments, over time, without ever completing the picture. Each clip, each quote, each offhand comment becomes another puzzle piece, and now the audience is finally seeing them laid out side by side. When someone repeatedly references an experience, but never fully describes it, people naturally start wondering what's being left unsaid. Especially when the person telling the story seems more focused on controlling the narrative than clarifying it. In this moment, Nick's own words are doing more work than any rumor ever could. They establish proximity. They confirm access. And they make it impossible to argue that this conversation is being manufactured out of thin air. He was there. He said so himself. And as the public re-examines who knew what, when they knew it, and how they talk about it now, Nick Cannon's casual admissions suddenly feel less like jokes and more like unanswered questions waiting to be addressed. As the story widens, Nick Cannon's name stops appearing in isolation and starts overlapping with a familiar group of industry heavyweights, most notably Jamie Foxx. Jamie has openly talked about Nick staying on his couch when Nick was just 13 years old, framing it as a generosity story, helping a young talent moment that Hollywood loves to romanticize. At face value, it sounds like mentorship, like another scrappy kid sleeping on couches to chase a dream. But when that admission is placed next to everything else, it stops sounding like an isolated favor and starts looking like part of a broader pattern. Because Jamie didn't just mentor Nick, he's also spoken about other young artists being housed in his space, casually mentioning that Ed Sheeran slept on his studio floor for weeks. Different eras, different artists, same setup. Young male talent embedded early into adult celebrity environments where lines were already blurred. That's where the comparison to Usher becomes impossible to ignore. Usher has long confirmed that he moved in with Diddy at around 14 years old, a situation that was once framed as legendary mentorship and career acceleration. Back then, the industry sold these stories as fairy tales, young stars gaining access, opportunity, and guidance from powerful men who saw their potential. But when you line these stories up side by side, the similarities are striking. Teenage boys, far from home, living with adult celebrities, immersed in spaces that were anything but age-appropriate, all under the banner of mentorship. What once sounded like coincidence now reads more like a system. And this is where the tone shifts. Because the more people revisit these stories, the less innocent they sound. Especially when Diddy's parties are brought back into the conversation. Events that were once described as glamorous, exclusive, and harmless fun, but are now being reinterpreted through a much darker lens. Add to that the long-whispered allegations surrounding Jamie Foxx and the so-called naked basketball games, and suddenly the environment these young men were exposed to doesn't feel playful or quirky anymore. It feels secretive, it feels adult, and it feels intentionally shielded from scrutiny at the time. For years, these rumors floated around the industry as jokes, side comments, things everyone heard about, but no one took seriously enough to question publicly. Jamie Foxx himself has danced around the topic in interviews, denying specifics while never fully shutting the door on the stories. And that's what keeps people talking, because the denials are partial, the explanations vague, and the history fragmented. When something truly never happened, it tends to disappear completely. But this didn't. It lingered. That lingering presence is where receipts and missing receipts come into play. Wendy Williams openly referenced the naked basketball rumors on her show years ago, speaking about them like an open secret rather than breaking news. There were alleged IMDb posts that surfaced and then vanished. Radio station chatter that former insiders and creators claim was common knowledge at the time. Viral content creators have since come forward saying they heard these stories as kids, overheard by accident while adults in media spaces talked freely, assuming no one was really listening. And now, many of those references are gone, deleted, scrubbed, or quietly buried, leaving behind just enough traces to make people wonder why they were erased at all. Because in Hollywood, silence isn't always proof of innocence. Sometimes it's proof of power. When stories are laughed off instead of addressed, when posts disappear instead of being disproven, and when people stop bringing things up rather than clarifying them, the absence becomes its own kind of evidence. Not of guilt, but of control. And the fact that so many people recall the same rumors from different corners of the industry at different times raises the question of how much was collectively ignored in plain sight. That brings the focus back to Nick Cannon, but now through a very different lens. For years, Nick's ever-growing family was treated like a punchline, a meme, a quirky celebrity headline. Another baby became entertainment rather than something to interrogate. But Nick himself shifted that narrative when he admitted that his decision to expand his family so dramatically was a trauma response following his breakup with Mariah Carey. He didn't call it calculated or intentional. He called it careless, emotional, reactive. And once that admission is on the table, it reframes everything. When you compare Nick's numbers to Diddy's, the parallels stand out in a way that feels uncomfortable rather than coincidental. Nick has fathered 12 children with multiple women. Diddy has 7 children with 4 women. Both men have spoken openly about legacy, masculinity, and power. Both came up in the same industry ecosystem, and both were deeply connected long before Nick ever became a household name. No one is saying Nick consciously followed a blueprint, but the similarities are there, and Nick's own words invite people to look closer. Taken together, these layers don't prove a single allegation, but they do reveal a pattern. Young talent placed early into adult worlds. Mentorship that lacked boundaries. Stories told with humor instead of reflection. Rumors dismissed instead of resolved. And coping mechanisms that manifested years later in ways Nick himself now admits were rooted in unresolved pain. At this point, the audience isn't being asked to believe anything blindly. They're being asked to notice what's been hiding in plain sight all along. When Mariah Carey enters this story, the energy shifts again, because Mariah has never been someone who needed proximity to power to stay relevant. She isn't a gossip source, she isn't chasing headlines, and she's never been known for speaking recklessly about her past. If anything, Mariah is famous for her silence. And that silence is exactly why people are paying attention now. Over the years, she has quietly but decisively distanced herself from certain people, certain eras, and certain narratives, and Diddy is one of them. After collaborating on some of the most culturally impactful remixes of her career, including Honey and the Fantasy Bad Boy remix, their professional relationship abruptly stopped. No follow-ups, no reunions, no nostalgia interviews, nothing. For two artists who shaped an entire era together, that absence is loud. What makes it even more notable is that Mariah didn't just distance herself from Diddy. She also stepped away from the version of Nick Cannon that existed during and after their marriage. When Mariah and Nick got together, their relationship moved at lightning speed, and for a moment it felt like a fairy tale. But once it ended, Mariah didn't drag him publicly, didn't weaponize interviews, didn't write a revenge narrative. She simply pulled back. She stopped engaging. She stopped explaining. And in recent years, she's made it clear that she prefers not to speak about Nick at all. That choice feels intentional, especially now, as Nick himself has admitted that the breakup deeply affected him and triggered behaviors he later described as careless and rooted in trauma. And yet, despite Mariah's silence, her name keeps resurfacing in this conversation. Not because she's inserting herself, but because people are revisiting the timeline. They're noticing who she stopped working with, who she stopped being photographed around, and how carefully she's curated distance from certain industry figures while maintaining long-standing relationships with others. Mariah has survived decades in an industry that rarely protects women, especially women who know too much. Her silence doesn't read as ignorance. It reads as boundaries. And in moments like this, boundaries often signal that someone saw enough to know when to step away. That brings us to the questions no one seems able to shake. What exactly did Nick Cannon see when he was that young? Why does he revisit those experiences with humor instead of reflection? Why does he brag about access without ever unpacking what that access actually involved? And why do so many celebrities, when talking about those same spaces, make a point to say they left early? Left early from what? Early compared to whom? And why do those statements always stop just short of saying more? These questions don't accuse, they linger. They sit in the space between what's been said and what's been avoided. Because when multiple people reference the same environments but consistently dodge specifics, it creates a pattern of selective transparency. Enough information to control the narrative, but never enough to invite scrutiny. And when that pattern stretches across decades, across different celebrities, across different interviews, it becomes harder to ignore. What's especially unsettling is that Nick Cannon continues to speak as someone who understands the weight of these stories, yet chooses to keep them surface level. He's articulate. He's self-aware. He knows how to explain trauma when it comes to his marriage, his health, and his family decisions. So the question becomes, why not here? Why does this chapter remain framed as a joke, a flex, or a footnote, when everything else in his life has been openly dissected? And that's where this story ends for now. Not with answers, but with a pause. Because the more names resurface, the more old interviews are replayed, and more people revisit their own pasts in light of what's happening now, the harder it becomes to believe that all of this is coincidence. Whatever the real connection between Diddy and Nick Cannon is, it didn't start in adulthood, and it didn't exist in isolation. And as the industry continues to reckon with what was normalized, overlooked, or quietly protected for years, one thing is clear. This story isn't finished yet. The question isn't whether more will come out, it's who will finally decide to say what everyone else has been hinting at all along.